The PlayStation 4 still has plenty of life in it before the PS5 launches later this year, but if the console's new releases ended on June 19th, Naughty Dog's The Last of Us Part 2 would be the perfect send-off. It's an absolute gut punch of a game built on the established and beloved formula of the original. It takes some bold steps in deviating from any path you'd ever imagine it taking, but the unexpected directions it turns to fit together neatly once they all fall into place. The Last of Us Part 2 is an engrossing game, and I'm also not sure I ever want to play it again. You'll find, dear player, that you will experience a spectrum of emotions directed at places and people you may not expect them to be aimed at. You'll love a character in one chapter and despise them in the next as you see what they were, are, and will become. I'm aware this all sounds a bit vague and cryptic, but that's because it's so difficult to talk about The Last of Us Part 2 story in any pointed way without having to plaster spoiler warnings literally everywhere. Even then, a shot-for-shot recount of the story wouldn't do the game justice. Just as the leaks and spoilers plaguing The Last of Us Part 2's launch attempted to give away pivotal moments without context, a second-hand account doesn't convey the weight of everything that happens. And that weight is felt in nearly everything you do in The Last of Us Part 2. And just as you pull away from some characters, you may find yourself completely repulsed at the idea of performing certain actions. For example, people scream for their fallen comrades. Everyone has names in this game to remind you they're people, not target practice, and will even get on their knees to ask you to walk away and let them live. Yet the only viable path is through them, not around. Unfortunately, the savagery of The Last of Us Part 2 is necessary. Through every remnant of the world you pick through, there are signs of people who were both too violent for their own good and not violent enough to survive. It's an evil, fundamental truth of The Last of Us Part 2's story that's meant to unnerve, and though it's a prerequisite for characters' well-beings, it's discomforting how quickly some acclimate themselves to this cruelness. However you plan on approaching these unforgiving confrontations, The Last of Us Part 2's refined level design gives you room to experiment and adapt, expanding its world by injecting more open-world aesthetics into an otherwise linear game. As impressive as this whole package is when it all comes together start to finish, as I mentioned earlier, it's an experience I'm not sure I plan to return to anytime soon. Playing The Last of Us Part 2 is an exhausting experience worth stepping away from every now and then in order to digest what's happened. Although the game relishes in making players uncomfortable and reminding them characters can lose everything at a moment's notice, those bleak traits are part of the game's appeal, even if the charm's a morbid one. It's a monumental effort in storytelling, and while not everything you do will sit right with you, the game never leads players to believe the result would be anything different. For Comicbook.com, I'm Chris Killian, and we give The Last of Us Part 2 5 out of 5 stars.